Hey Ukulele Underground, my name is Matt Dahlberg, and I'm really excited to start doing this new unscripted series with you guys. Basically these webcam sessions. I actually teach ukulele through Skype and FaceTime and all those types of programs for a living. I get to teach the ukulele through these, and it's a lot of fun. I've been doing it for several years now, and I thought it'd be a really good idea to make this video series to talk about some things that a lot of different students have struggled with, and some of the things that, as a teacher I tried to use to help them get more comfortable with it, what I found worked and didn't, and kind of use this as an opportunity to do a little lesson about things that you might not find elsewhere, just because it's based on these private lessons. The thing we're going to talk about today is one of the most requested things I get when people are starting to take lessons, or when I'm emailed a question, and that's, I'm really struggling with moving from this chord to this chord. What can I do? And it's a really good point, because so often when we're learning the ukulele, we're kind of thinking, okay, we got to learn this chord, and now we learn this chord, and now it's just going back and forth between them. But it's not always that easy. In fact, thinking about things in a more efficient way can oftentimes be the difference between doing something proficiently and really struggling with it. So let's go ahead and take a really basic example here. Let's look at a G to C chord, which is a transition many of you probably don't struggle with, but thinking about it in a different way can help with other chords. We'll work on a couple examples here. But let's go ahead and take a look. So with a G to C chord, oftentimes we're taught playing a G chord like this with our three fingers: index finger on the second fret of the C, ring finger on third fret of the E, and middle on the second fret of the A. And oftentimes we're taught to then play a C by switching with our ring finger to go here to the third fret of the A string, stripping away the other two, right? Well, if we're practicing doing that like this all the time, it works, but there might be an easier way, and that's kind of the point of this little exercise. And there sure is an easier way. Instead of stripping off these two fingers and this one, and then moving this to the third fret on the A, what if we were to take off our index finger, take off our ring finger, and just pivot our middle finger up one fret? Now, more often than not, we're not really taught to play a C chord with our middle finger, and it might even feel awkward at first, but that's kind of the point. By playing that third fret on the A string with our middle finger, all that we have to do is pivot in and out. And this makes it much easier to approach, and kind of the whole point to this little lesson here. Whenever you're switching between chords, it's not necessarily how you normally play the chord, but how you can best play the chord to go into the next one. And on the flip side of that, sometimes it's making the sacrifice on how you play the chord initially to make the transition into the next one a little bit easier. This C chord's a great example of that. If we're going from a G to a C, or if we're going from a C to a G, it's easier to just pivot on that middle finger. So while you may play a C chord normally like this, if you're about to play a G chord, it actually could benefit you to play it like this, to then pivot in and make that a little bit easier. Obviously, if you're playing, say, an A minor chord after the C, it doesn't make much sense to use your middle finger here, because then you'd have to go to 2 on the G with that middle finger. I suppose you could use your index finger there, which would work, but then it might create a problem for an F. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the point is, chord progressions are not always the same. So you want to adapt the way you play chords to reflect that. Let's work on an example that's a little more difficult, but I think a little bit better too. If we're switching from a G major chord, which we just talked about here, to what's called an E minor chord. An E minor is normally our ring finger on 4 of the C, our middle finger on 3 of the E, and our index on 2 of the A. And what you see here from my E minor and my G is basically every single finger needs to change. And that can make it a very difficult transition, especially when you're first learning. It's one of those ones that can kind of separate an experienced player from a more novice player, is this transition being easy or hard. But let's go ahead and look at it with more efficiency. What actually changes between these two chords? Well, it's kind of cool. We're starting at 0, 2, 3, 2 with our G chord, and we're going to 0, 4, 3, 2 with our E minor. And when I say these numbers, what I'm talking about is going from top to bottom, G, C, E, and A. The G, we have 0 as in our open string, 2 as in our second fret, 3 as in our third fret, and 2 as in our second fret. And with the E minor, we have 0, 4, 3, 2. Only one number actually changes there, but we move all 4 fingers, or 3 fingers in this case. And that seems a little, well, wasteful in terms of how much efficiency we're not taking advantage of. So there's 2 ways that we can kind of overcome this. One is, when we're playing the G chord, what if we were to just take our pinky and stack it up to the 4th fret of the C string? If we do this and make sure that we're not hitting our pinky on other strings, but just that C, we now actually have 0, 4, 3, 2 being played. The index finger is now not even a part of the chord really, but we can leave it there for the simplicity of the G chord going into the E minor. But this transition from going from this G to this E minor now is much easier when it comes to what's actually happening. The difficulty it might cause is the fact that you're not used to putting your pinky up there, and that can provide a challenge. But that's trying to make it more efficient, and that's kind of what this is all about. Another way that we could look at this is with our G chord, this is the way that we usually play it. But just like pretty much every chord, there are multiple ways of playing the exact same fingering of a chord using different fingers. For instance, one of my favorite ways to play a G chord is to actually take your index finger and bar it across the 2nd fret. Then add your middle finger on the 3rd fret of the E. This is the same 0, 2, 3, 2 that our other G chord is. It's exactly identical. But what it does is it frees up our other 2 fingers. So in this case, when we want to go to an E minor, which we normally play like this, now you see I only have to pivot 2 fingers to make that motion because the middle finger on the 3rd fret can remain the same. But it's even easier than that. Because if this index finger is barred across 2, and I just add this ring finger here on 4 of the C, I'm actually now playing 0, 4, 3, 2, which is an E minor chord. And this is a really great transition. Much, much easier to play. And that can really help open up things when you're playing with these chords. Because now instead of having to switch all 3 fingers, now I can just simply add 1, whether I'm using this little bar technique or add 1 being the pinky finger. So whenever you're chording with things, you want to take a look at what's being used in terms of fingers on strings and how you can better make it efficient. What I really recommend is taking a look at one chord and then moving to the next and figure out exactly what needs to move and in what way. And if there's a way that you can make it a little bit easier on yourself. All too often we rely on our muscle memory to make these chord changes, and that is sort of put all the fingers on, take all the fingers off, put all the fingers on, and that makes it a bit slower. So if we look at another example here, I want to show you how we can pivot fingers to keep kind of one point on the ukulele so that instead of removing all the fingers, we can, well, again, efficiency is a word I'm saying a lot today, and we can keep it more efficient. So let's use the G chord one more time here. So play our G. Now, we're going to then move to one of my favorite chords called an A minor 7, which for all of you uke nerds out there might know is all open on the ukulele. Well, we're not using that one because that's a pretty easy transition. But rather what we're going to play is an A minor 7 like this. You take your middle finger, put on the 4th fret of the C string, ring finger, put on the 5th fret of the E string, and index finger, place it on the 3rd fret of the A string. If you are familiar with the shape, it's actually the same as a G minor chord, just moved up 2 frets, still leaving the G string open. But this is an A minor 7 chord, and one of my favorites. Now, if I were to go between a G and A minor 7, I might think, oh, okay, G, and now, okay, A minor 7. But the problem with this is every time I'm doing this, I'm taking off all 3 fingers. This is a very, very common problem people have. What I want to look at is, do I need to move all 3 fingers? So let's look at the G. We've got our index finger here on the 2nd fret of the C, our ring finger here on the 3rd fret of the E, and our middle finger here on the 2nd fret of the A. Now I'm going to move to my A minor 7. I'm going to remove all the fingers, which we won't be doing forever, but for now, and I'm going to place them on. And now I've got my middle finger on the C, which is different than the index finger on the C, so that's no good. And let's go all the way to the bottom, the A string. I got my index finger here on the A string, which I normally have my index finger here on the C, so that's no good either. But I got my ring finger here on the 5th fret of the E string. And I also have my ring finger here on the 3rd fret of the G string, or E string with the G chord. So what really needs to happen with these chords is not removing the hand completely, but utilizing that finger that's on the same string in the same point and position to actually facilitate the transition. Instead of going from my G from this to my A minor 7 like this, what if I do my G like this to my A minor 7 like this? You'll see that I'm keeping the ring finger on because it does not need to move. And then I'm pivoting on that to move the other two fingers. Another little interesting point is a G chord oftentimes has our fingers sort of angled kind of towards my right shoulder, right? But the A minor 7 has my fingers kicking more straight up and down. So you would think that they'd be very different because of that, but because the ring finger stays put, I can make this transition much easier on myself to play more quickly. So try to look at all sorts of different chords to be able to find where you might be able to make it more efficient. And remember that you don't always have to remove every finger, and you can finger chords differently depending on what you're trying to go to or where you're coming from within a chord progression. Be sure to check out all my different videos on Ukulele Underground. I actually just launched a new course with them that I'm super excited about. It's called the Ultimate Ukulele Strumming Course. It's available now in the marketplace. We'll be actually making these videos available every week. I'll be streaming these. But every other week will be posted on YouTube, with the week in between will actually be available for download on the Ukulele Underground Marketplace, which is where that course is, as well as these sessions, and a whole lot more coming, which we're pretty excited about. If you ever have any questions, please check out my website, mattukulele.com. On there's a contact page where you can shoot me an email, and I'd love to answer some questions from people throughout these episodes too. So if you have a question, be sure to email me there. And take it easy, have a great one, and aloha.